To understand why, we need to go back. How we outsourced the war machine. The Cold War ended with a victory lap and a spreadsheet. Washington wanted a peace dividend, and the military drew down. The mission didn't disappear, the people did. That's when the language changed. Buy services, not people. Outsourcing became a strategy, not a tool. Here, that's where the incentives bent. If you don't own the people, you eventually don't own the work. And then you don't own the knowledge, the tools, or the leverage. By the late 1990s, acquisition reform promised speed through the marketplace. Enter primes, Lockheed, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop, General Dynamics, no longer just builders but architects. The government stopped specifying how to build and started specifying what to buy. Meanwhile, the rulebook grew. The Federal Acquisition Regulation and its defense supplements, a labyrinth of exceptions, waivers, and special authorities, made oversight its own profession. Complexity didn't block capture, it enabled it. If you knew the maze, you could design the exit. Then came the Rumsfeld-era transformation. The mantra was fast, joint, agile. The chart got leaner, the contractor footprint got heavier. Logistics, maintenance, base operations, networks, if it could be competed, it could be contracted. On paper, it was flexible capacity. In practice, it created permanent dependencies. The revolving door didn't just spin, it synchronized. Senior officials took badges off one day and swiped into boardrooms the next. Acquisition leaders rotated into industry, then back into government with a sharper sense of which clauses mattered. Not illegal, just aligned. Here's the quiet revolution, the lead systems integrator. Give a prime the job of stitching the whole system together. They would set the interfaces, the standards, the data formats. That meant they owned the architecture, the skeleton, and the nervous system. If you own the interfaces, you own the future. New components would have to play by your rules, through your gateways, under your licenses. The government still signed the checks. The contractor owned the map. Meanwhile, the battlefield went digital. Radios turned into apps. Missiles turned into algorithms. Aircraft became flying software bundles. The procurement machine kept buying platforms, but power shifted to code. Software isn't a one-time delivery, it's a relationship. Updates, patches, keys, data, each with a contract line and a clock. The sustainment tail got longer. Money moved from procurement to operations and support. The primes noticed. So did Wall Street. Inside the Pentagon, program offices learned to manage vendors, not technology. A new ritual took hold. Write requirements, host an industry day, evaluate proposals, then watch as the winner shapes the interfaces in their image. The language of control became data rights. Government purpose rights sounded strong, but the fine print mattered. If the prime asserted limited rights over critical technical data or restricted rights over software, the program couldn't modify code without permission. Not couldn't as in shouldn't. Couldn't as in the tools won't let you, the warranties void, and the cyber authorizations break. Meanwhile, oversight learned to measure compliance. Boxes got checked, cyber plans filed, configuration baselines approved, risk accepted. But the Government Accountability Office kept surfacing the same pattern. Weapon systems with trivial vulnerabilities, passwords set to password, red teams walking in through vendor portals. The roots weren't just technical, they were contractual. When vendors controlled the patch pipeline, security moved at corporate cadence, not mission need. Human moments told the story better than memos. A maintenance chief waiting on hold with a help desk to re-enable a locked diagnostic feature. A logistics captain told to stand down while a contractor rep flew in to plug a laptop into a vehicle the Army owned but couldn't touch. A squadron sortie rate throttled by a cloud service in another state. Each delay had a paper trail that looked rational. Put together, it looked like power. Congress didn't ignore it, it domesticated it. Jobs in districts, supplier networks across states, funding lines braided through committees. Every program became a political ecosystem. Bid protests turned into negotiation tools. Delay was leverage. If a contract award got challenged, months slipped, costs rose, urgency climbed, until the only risk anyone talked about was schedule, not dependence. The safest path became the familiar vendor, with the familiar interfaces and the familiar limits. And yet there was a promise in the beginning. Outsourcing would make the force more ready, more flexible, more modern. Sometimes it did. Private logistics could surge. Contractors could field specialists faster than the services could retrain. But the bill came later in sustainment. The cost didn't just rise, it calcified. Every year, the operating budget carried forward the licenses, the service agreements, the engineering change proposals, priced like ransom notes. What nobody emphasized at the time was the shift from ownership to access. The government paid to access capability it used to own. It paid again to maintain that access. And it paid a third time to regain any sliver of independence it lost. That's how dependence becomes the business model. This was the moment everything changed. Once primes owned the architecture, the software lock-in followed. And when software rules the weapon, whoever holds the code holds the key. The software lock-in nobody voted for. To see how fast the center of gravity shifted, follow a single missile battery. The launcher, radar, and command post used to be hardware stories, bolts, bearings, cables. Now the firing logic, the threat library, the friend or foe rules, all of it rides on code that the government pays for but doesn't fully control. The platform is steel. The weapon is software. And software lives on licenses, permissions, and a vendor's timetable. Proprietary interfaces sounded harmless. We'll integrate it for you. Closed software development kits were pitched as quality control. Withheld source code came wrapped in the phrase, protecting intellectual property. The effect was simple. If the government needed a tweak, say, to add a new radar mode or change an encryption routine, it couldn't. Not without a contract modification, a vendor sprint, and a delivery date that never aligned with the next deployment. The constraint wasn't physics, it was paperwork. People flagged it early. Auditors walked into labs and found weapon systems with default admin credentials. Red teams plugged thumb drives into maintenance ports and got shell access. A GAO team later wrote it plainly. The department was just beginning to grapple with the scale of vulnerabilities, and test teams were able to guess passwords like password. That wasn't because the engineers were reckless. It was because the patch pipeline was captive. Security fixes moved through corporate QA gates and legal reviews. Attackers didn't wait. Mission windows did. Sustainment contracts turned the screws. The initial buy got the headlines. The follow-on maintenance paid the dividends. Annual fees for patching, for cyber hardening, for data rights support. If the government wanted to run its own scanner or integrate a third-party tool, it hit a wall labeled restricted rights. Change the code without permission and warranties void. Break the configuration baseline and your authority to operate suspends. The risk manager signs off, but the risk is structured into the business model. Here is where the lock-in gets personal. A base commander stares at a grounded jet and a red banner in the maintenance system. Update pending, vendor review required. The squadron's mission depends on a patch that lives on a private cloud controlled by a contractor 2 states away. The help desk says it'll be 72 hours. Weather won't wait. Neither will the adversary's sortie cycle. The commander knows the airframe can fly. The software says it can't. The poster child is the F-35's logistics brain. First ALIS, then its promised fix, ODIN. The acronym changed. The dependency didn't. Mission data files, the DNA of what a pilot sees and how the jet reacts, are built in specialized labs. Who generates them matters. Who owns them matters more. If DoD needs a rapid reprogram for a new threat emitter, it still routes through a contractor pipeline with its own queue and its own uptime. Aircraft availability in practice can hinge on a server farm's mood. The same logic moved across fleets. Artillery fire control needed vendor keys to enable modes troops trained on. Radios required licensed waveforms and proprietary loaders. Even simple diagnostics hid behind dongles and passwords no soldier owned. Maintenance chiefs learned a new triage. Is this a wrench problem or a license problem? If it was the latter, the fix was a ticket number and a waiting room. Security took collateral damage. Vulnerabilities in supply chains don't start at the top. They seep in at sub-tier vendors with thin margins and thinner cyber hygiene. When a contractor's remote support portal becomes the easiest way into a network, attackers follow the trust path. After major intrusions in the wider tech world showed how a compromised vendor update can move like water, the defense world recognized its mirror image. But recognition didn't equal control. Patch cadence remained a negotiation, not a command. All of this wasn't debated on the House floor. Voters never weighed in on closed SDKs or government purpose, rights versus unlimited rights. The lock-in came by clause, by interface control document, by commercial off-the-shelf promise that quietly redefined ownership as access. Program offices were told to move fast, accept mature solutions, keep to schedule. They did. The price tag wasn't just dollars, it was autonomy. And yet, the teams inside the building could see the alternative. If the government owned the interfaces, if it held the data rights to the core, vendors could compete at the edges without dictating the center. Instead, contracts normalized a different structure. Primes owned the connective tissue, and every new component paid tolls. That's how a force ends up with jets that need a help desk, ships with black boxes no sailor can open, and radios that won't talk until a license server nods. The irony is quiet but sharp. The military sought agility. It gained speed that belonged to someone else. The code that makes modern warfare possible now sets the terms of when it's possible, and nobody voted for that. The jet that needs a help desk, F-35. The promise was simple: move from ALIS to ODIN and the headaches go away. ALIS was the F-35's nervous system, tracking parts, predicting failures, pushing mission files, but it stumbled. Too heavy, too slow, too error-prone. ODIN arrived with a new name and a cloud-first pitch. The sticker on the box said modern. The wiring under the label still led to a vendor console. Pilots noticed the difference right where it mattered least. The menus looked cleaner. The dependencies didn't. Here's the part that decides what the jet actually is in combat: mission data files. They're the jet's threat library and its instincts. What to see, what to ignore, how to prioritize a radar ping. They're built in specialized reprogramming labs with classified tools. The files move across controlled pipes and into aircraft that can't safely fly a high-end mission without them. Who generates those files? Mostly contractor-led teams. Who can change them quickly when a new emitter shows up? The pipeline says the vendor touches the code. The squadron waits. Grounding risk sounds abstract until you watch a sortie evaporate. One pilot walked to the jet, strapped in, ran checks. The logistics brain flagged a replacement part as invalid. It was. Supply had the chain of custody, the form was stamped, the part met spec. But the system's database lagged the real world by a day. The jet's computer didn't care. The sortie scrubbed. The pilot climbed down. The mechanic stared at a red message and opened a ticket. Availability, once a wrench and hours equation, now depended on server uptime in a building the base didn't control. If the cloud that feeds ODIN hiccuped, if the pipeline that pushes mission data files queued too long, jets that were mechanically fine rolled back into shelters. Commanders developed a new weather, network weather. Ops briefings included it the way they included wind. Is the data up? Are the files current? Do we have the keys? Costs told their own story. Procurement made headlines. Sustainment wrote the checks. The original buy got you an airframe. Keeping it ready bought you access to updates, to patches, to the profiles that let a radar mode light up. Each cycle renewed the dependency. The curve bent upward, the leverage bent with it. When sustainment eclipses procurement, the gatekeeper isn't just the prime on the factory floor. It's the team that owns the software pipeline. Security rode in the same car. The F-35 is a flying network node with an attack surface measured in code paths. The pipeline that builds, tests, and delivers software is a supply chain in itself. Every tool, every environment, every portal is a potential point of entry. When auditors warned that the department was just beginning to face the scale of vulnerabilities in weapons, they were pointing at this kind of complexity. The safest route is control over the build, but the build lived offsite. Patch cadence followed corporate calendars, export rules, and QA gates. Threats didn't. Pilot tells it straighter. One morning, his flight plan shifted for a pop-up tasking, new emitter in the area. The squadron needed a reprogrammed file to make sense of the air picture. The lab could do it, but not now. The slot was later in the week. He launched with yesterday's brain in a jet that could outfly anything nearby. He flew a sophisticated aircraft with yesterday's map of the world because the refresh lived behind someone else's schedule. Engineers aren't the villains here. The system they built solved real problems: parts tracking, predictive maintenance, configuration control. ALIS tried to be a logistics oracle. ODIN tried to be a slimmer, smarter version. The bind came from ownership. The government owned the planes. It rented the logic. When you rent the logic, you don't decide when the logic changes. Meanwhile, workarounds sprouted. Units mirrored data locally, cached the latest good configuration, built checklists to survive outages. They learned which error codes were lies and which ones would get someone killed. They kept laminated cards for what to do when the system says no. Sometimes they flew under waivers, with commanders signing risk acceptances that moved responsibility down the chain because the pipeline above them couldn't move fast enough. There's a human tax in all of this. Maintainers woke early to babysit uploads and fought for bandwidth on base networks. Pilots briefed two versions of a mission, the one with the new files and the one without, because they didn't trust the green checks until the jet screens confirmed it. Program managers sat between urgency and contract law, translating operational need into change requests priced in labor hours they couldn't audit. Everyone adapted. Nobody owned the clock. Here's the quiet irony. The F-35 was built to fuse, to be the aircraft that sees first and decides first. It is, but the deciding depends on a data river you don't command. When that river narrows, the jet becomes an expensive airframe waiting for a login. And on the ramp, a crew chief holds a handheld terminal, stares at a spinning icon, and says the line that shouldn't fit a fifth-generation fighter: "We're waiting on the help desk." A destroyer with a loading screen, Navy systems. On the pier in Norfolk, a destroyer's bridge hums with screens. The helmsman's wheel is smaller than you think. The real control sits in consoles that boot like laptops. A petty officer taps a menu to bring up the Aegis combat system. The cursor spins. A splash screen flashes the vendor's logo before the tactical picture loads. It's a warship with a loading bar. Aegis used to be hardware and code welded together by sailors and engineers who lived with it at sea. Now much of it lives behind Contractor black boxes. The displays look like Navy gear. The guts behave like proprietary appliances. When a radar mode throws an error, the message is check waveguide. It's called support. The tech manual points to a diagnostic that only the OEM tool can run. Sailors know where the panel is. They don't have the key. On literal combat ships, the promise was modularity. Swap mission packages, change the role, sail out ready for something new. The reality at sea was a cascade of passwords and dongles. To replace a failed module, crews followed procedures to the letter, then stopped at a login prompt that only a contractor could unlock. The ship could navigate, talk, self-defend, but the mission system waited on credentials the Navy didn't own. You can't solder a password. Maintenance turned into choreography. A bearing overheated. The engineering chief traced the fault, isolated the circuit, and needed the diagnostic to clear the alert. The software that cleared it required a license refreshed every quarter. The ship had sailed with a grace period. The counter hit 0 2 days into deployment. The work order went up the chain. Emails bounced between a fleet support center and a vendor help desk. A day turned into 2. The bearing got replaced. The alert stayed. The ship sat pierside waiting for a digital. Reset the crew could have done themselves if the tool wasn't locked. Meanwhile, the industrial control systems that move fuel, water, and power across the hull carry their own baggage. They're cousins of systems that run factories ashore: programmable logic controllers, HMIs, SCADA segments. They inherit the same vulnerabilities researchers publish every month: default credentials, weak segmentation, outdated firmware. Navy hardening teams push fixes. But where firmware is stamped, vendor only, the patch cadence follows a contractor calendar. The sea doesn't schedule around compliance. In one port call, a cybersecurity team found a maintenance laptop with a vendor image and a remote support client set to auto-update. The vendor portal was a trusted path through the ship's defensive boundary. It was convenient. It was a hole. Red teams later admitted that when they tested shipboard networks, the easiest door wasn't a sailor's mistake. It was a vendor's default. Operationally, dependency shows up as hours that don't count. An exercise timeline ticks forward while a destroyer waits for a software token to validate the latest weapons doctrine file. The crew drills manual backups. They're sailors. They prepare. But the manual mode bypasses the fusion that modern naval combat assumes. You can fire without the full picture. It's just riskier, and commanders know it. Sustainment budgets bleed here too. The ship is funded. Keeping the ship's brains current is a separate line that grows with each software improvement. The Navy buys a hull and rents the smarts. Over time, the fees for access to diagnostics, for new threat libraries, for the right to modify technical orders stack like barnacles. You can scrape barnacles. You can't scrape clauses. There's a human moment that repeats. A bosun's mate leans on a bulkhead waiting to cast off lines. The captain delays departure by 20 minutes because the integrated navigation suite is applying a patch that can't be paused. The tide window is tight. The patch finishes with a cheerful chime. The ship slips its moorings a notch late. Nobody writes a memo about it. Everyone feels the shape of the dependence. Even simple repairs get abstract. A valve actuator misbehaves, the part's in the storeroom. The chief can swap it in an hour, but the control software won't recognize the new serial without an OEM provisioning step. The provisioning script sits on a secure portal that requires a token refreshed ashore. Comms can reach back. The server is down for maintenance. The 1-hour fix becomes a 36-hour wait. The schedule blames weather. The crew knows it wasn't the sea. Sailors aren't passive in this. They hoard known good images, document workarounds, build their own checklists to survive brownouts and freezes. Some commands push for open interface standards so the Navy can swap components without renegotiating access. The pushback meets the same wall: legacy contracts, asserted data rights, risk-averse lawyers who warn that modifying software voids certifications. The path of least resistance circles back to the vendor. You can feel the culture shift on the bridge. The Combat Information Center is quieter, more deliberate, more screen than scope. It's powerful when it's up. When it isn't, a destroyer that can cross an ocean waits for a spinning icon to stop. The crew looks at the clock. The ocean doesn't care. The system does. And a warship, ready in every physical way, holds for a login. The Army's invisible contractors. Drive onto an Army logistics yard, and you'll see forklifts, pallets, and tablets in every hand. Those tablets run the Army's logistics brain, GCSS-Army. It tracks parts, fuel, serials, maintenance histories, the bloodstream of a brigade. It's also a doorway. Data migrations, report templates, even how a unit defines ready, often run through contractor-led teams that built the workflows and still hold the keys. Soldiers sign in. The console answers to a vendor calendar. In motor pools, Abrams and Bradleys line up under sun-faded tarps. A mechanic opens a panel, traces a fault, and stops at a password prompt for a diagnostic mode only the OEM can unlock. The machine belongs to the Army. The toolchain belongs to someone else. So field reps ride shotgun across the force, embedded like permanent guests, indispensable, expensive, and invisible on the org chart. When a turbine controller glitches, the fix isn't a wrench first. It's a phone call. MRAPs tell the same story. They were rushed to theater to defeat IEDs, and they saved lives. They also arrived with sustainment packages that assumed a contractor in the loop. Reset depots learn to triage. What can soldiers do? What requires vendor sign-off? What voids warranties? A battalion commander once summed it up bluntly: I own the truck, but I rent the okay. The rent is time. Then there are the unmanned systems. A small UAV looks simple: a hand launch, a catapult, a tablet for a ground control station. Behind that screen sits a stack of software that touches licensing servers, encryption key material, and update portals the unit doesn't control. If a key rolls and the push doesn't arrive, the birds don't fly. The air is clear. The sky is closed. Here's a day that repeats across training areas. A convoy stages at dawn, fuel, water, comms checks. A young lieutenant does the math on drive time and windows to make the range slot. One handheld radio-filled device refuses to load the new crypto because the image on it drifted out of compliance with the vendor's loader. The fix is a re-image. The only dongle that can do it is with a contractor 2 hours away. Range control won't hold the lane. The convoy sits for 48 hours. The schedule lists weather. The platoon knows it was a missing cable and a locked tool. Readiness metrics bend around these moments. Units report availability by definitions that grew out of what the system can see. If GCSS-Army says a part is in transit, a vehicle looks better on paper than it is in the bay. If a platform fails because a license expired, some dashboards treat that as awaiting admin action, not a deadlined asset. When contractors design the reporting schema, the numbers can be technically true and operationally off. Leaders fight to correct it. The database argues back. Meanwhile, soldiers adapt. They cache known good images, keep cold kits of spares with serials they trust, and map which portals go dark on weekends. Some units build shadow playbooks, who to call, which rep will answer, how to beg a token refresh from a help desk in another time zone. None of it shows up on a training schedule. All of it shapes whether a unit moves on time. Cyber rides along. Those tablets and portals form a supply chain of trust the Army doesn't fully own. A vendor's remote support client on a maintenance laptop can be the softest spot in a hardened network. Red teams say the quiet part. We got in through a vendor portal. Patch windows don't sync with mission windows. A brigade G6 knows an update closes a hole. The vendor says Thursday. The rotation starts Tuesday. The culture shifts one help ticket at a time. Company X sends a rep to fix what a staff sergeant wasn't allowed to touch in uniform last year. He retired. He came back with a new badge and the same toolbox, now authorized to run the diagnostic he used to be blocked from. He solves the problem in 20 minutes and leaves behind a lesson nobody wanted to learn. Authority travels with the contract, not the competence. None of this looks dramatic from above. It's 1,000 small weights, 1,000 small permissions. The Army trains to operate under fire. Increasingly, it also trains to operate under license. And the invisible contractors, on bases, on phones, in code, decide how fast the force can move. The supply chain that can stop a war. Follow the trail from a grounded jet or a delayed convoy, and you'll hit the same choke points. Parts nobody else makes, processes nobody else can certify, and contracts that turn scarcity into leverage. Hardware looks solid until you look upstream.